universe, and welcome back to another episode of Disturbing Ouija Board Reddit Horror Stories. So, tonight we're diving into two stories that prove some things are better left buried. And in the first one, a museum technician, and after finding an old Ouija board in storage, our exhibits start vanishing. Then, a bus driver tells a story so dark a kid collapsed before they even finished. So, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and let's dive in.
I'm a museum technician. After we found an old Ouija board in storage, exhibits started disappearing. Okay. I need to rewind a little before I get back to the Ouija board thing, because a few people in the comments asked how I even ended up working at a museum in the first place. And honestly, that part actually matters more than I thought it did. I'm recording this at like 1:30 in the morning again. I tried going to bed earlier, but my brain keeps doing that annoying replay thing where it runs through the same memories over and over. You know when you scroll TikTok too long and your head feels kind of foggy? It's like that, except instead of dumb videos, it's just the same moment stuck in my head. Also, my neighbor upstairs keeps pacing around for some reason. It sounds like someone dragging a chair every few minutes. So yeah, not sleeping tonight. Anyway, if you're wondering why someone like me ended up cataloguing dusty objects in a basement museum archive, the short version is my grandpa. My grandfather, Arthur Delgado, was an archaeologist. Not the Indiana Jones type. He always laughed when people said that. But a real academic archaeologist. University digs, research papers, that kind of thing. When I was a kid, he had this small study in his house that felt like stepping into another world. Shelves packed with field journals, old maps pinned to corkboards, boxes filled with pottery fragments wrapped in newspaper. The smell in that room was always this mix of old paper, leather, and desert dust that somehow never went away. Every time my parents dropped me off there, I'd go straight to that room, and he'd let me sit on the floor while he showed me artifacts. Nothing super valuable. Most of the stuff he kept at home was just fragments or duplicates, but to a 10-year-old kid, it felt like treasure. He'd hand me a broken piece of pottery and say something like, "See this pattern here? Someone painted that about 900 years ago." 900 years. That number used to blow my mind. The idea that someone I'd never meet, living a completely different life centuries ago, had held that exact object in their hands. That feeling stuck with me. In high school, everyone else wanted to be influencers or engineers or whatever was trending that year. I wanted to dig things out of the ground. Reality, unfortunately, had other plans. Field archaeology is insanely competitive and honestly kind of brutal if you don't have the right connections or funding. By the time I finished my degree in anthropology, I realized I wasn't going to be flying around the world discovering ancient cities, but museums. Museums still felt close to that world. Artifacts still had stories. And museum work, at least in theory, meant protecting those stories. So when a job listing popped up for museum technician, collections department, I applied immediately. It paid. Okay, not great, but it meant working directly with artifacts. The interview was weirdly casual too. I remember sitting across from Melissa, the collections manager I mentioned earlier, while she flipped through my resume and asked if I'd ever handled archival materials before. I told her about my grandpa, about the pottery fragments, about how he taught me to catalogue objects and record details in notebooks. She smiled at that. I think that's honestly what got me the job. 3 weeks later, I had a badge, a storage keycard, and access to a part of the museum that almost no visitors ever saw. And at first, it was exactly what I imagined. Quiet hallways, rows of artifacts, climate-controlled rooms where history basically sat, waiting for someone to remember it again. Sometimes during lunch breaks, I'd just walk the storage aisles and read the catalogue tags. Civil War medical kits, fragments of early aviation equipment, letters from immigrants arriving through Ellis Island. One time, I opened a crate containing items recovered from a shipwreck and just stared at this rusted pocket watch for like 5 minutes. I kept thinking about the last person who touched it, that feeling my grandpa used to talk about, the connection across time. Working there gave me that all the time, at least at the beginning, because the museum had two completely different personalities, depending on when you were there. During the day, it was busy. School groups, tourists, kids running around the dinosaur exhibit. But after 5 p.m., the building changed. Lights dimmed in certain wings. Security gates rolled halfway down. The public areas became quiet in a way that almost felt heavy. And the storage level underground got even quieter. Sometimes the HVAC system would make these low humming sounds that echoed down the concrete hallways. The fluorescent lights flickered in certain sections like they were struggling to stay on. When I first started, one of the older technicians, a guy named Carl, joked with me about it. He said, "Basements in museums always feel weird. Too many old things in one place." At the time, I laughed. Now I think about that comment a lot, because about 4 months into the job, Melissa sent me that message about the spiritualism collection crate in Section C. And that's when this whole thing really started. Section C storage wasn't a place people visited often. Most of the artifacts there weren't scheduled for exhibits anytime soon. It was basically long-term storage, objects that had historical value but didn't fit current gallery themes. The hallway lights were dimmer there too. I remember pushing my rolling cart down that corridor, the wheels squeaking slightly on the concrete floor, tablet in hand while the inventory app loaded. The crate was exactly where the system said it would be. Brown wood, metal corner brackets, a brittle old paper tag taped to the front. C19. Spiritualism collection. When I unclipped the metal latches and lifted the lid, I expected the usual stuff. Pamphlets about seances, maybe some Victorian parlor game equipment. The first thing I saw were the photographs. Black and white images of people sitting around tables holding hands. Classic seance photos. Then the brass pendulum wrapped in archival cloth. And under that, the Ouija board. I've seen plenty of Ouija boards before. You've probably seen one too. The standard board with clean printed letters. The sun and moon graphics. The little plastic planchette. This one looked different. Older. The wood was dark and uneven, like it had absorbed something over time. The letters weren't perfectly aligned either. They looked hand-carved instead of printed. And the planchette was sitting exactly in the center of the board. That alone wasn't weird. What was weird was how clean the board looked. Everything else in the crate had that thin, dusty layer you expect from storage. But the board, it looked like someone had wiped it recently. I even ran my finger lightly across one corner, just to check. No dust. At the time, I assumed conservation had cleaned it. So I took out my phone, snapped a few catalogue photos, and uploaded them to the database. Then I closed the crate and rolled my cart back toward the main storage corridor. I didn't think about the board again that day, or the next day, or the day after, until Thursday afternoon, when the first exhibit vanished from a locked display case. And that was when things in the museum started getting strange. The museum didn't close immediately when the second artifact vanished. That's the part that still feels surreal to me. You'd think two objects disappearing from locked cases within 24 hours would trigger alarms, lockdowns, police reports, something dramatic. Instead, the response at first was awkward confusion. Like when someone in a group chat says something uncomfortable and everyone pretends they didn't see it. The Egyptian amulet was discovered missing around 11:20 that Friday morning. A tour guide noticed it first. She was leading a small group, mostly retirees, the kind who travel in those charter buses and wear those little wireless headsets. One of them pointed at the display case and said something like, "Oh, that's odd. Wasn't there supposed to be something there?" The pedestal inside the glass case was empty, just a small indentation where the amulet had been mounted. The guide assumed conservation had removed it, but conservation hadn't, and the case was still locked. I didn't hear about it until Melissa called me upstairs from storage. When I walked into the collections office, the atmosphere had completely changed. Nobody was talking casually anymore. 3 security guards were standing around one of the monitors, replaying footage. Melissa was leaning over the desk with her arms crossed. The director looked pale. They played the footage again when I walked in. Gallery camera, timestamp 10:54 a.m. Visitors walking through like normal. A couple stopping to read the description plaque. Someone adjusting their backpack. The glass case never opened. At 10:57, a group of students walked by and blocked the camera for maybe 2 seconds. When they passed, the amulet was gone. Just gone. No one touching the case. No visible movement. Nothing falling. Nothing sliding. Just absence. I remember saying out loud, "That has to be some kind of glitch," because that's the only explanation that made sense. A camera bug. A frame skip. Something. But security had 3 camera angles covering that area. All 3 showed the same thing. 2 seconds of students walking past. Then an empty pedestal. The museum director rubbed his temples like he had a migraine. "Okay," he said finally. "We close early today. Internal audit. Everyone document what they've worked with this week." That's when Melissa showed me the database entry again, the Ouija board catalog page, the one accessed at 3:12 a.m. using my credentials, and the line of text underneath it. One taken. More requested. It still makes my stomach tighten remembering that sentence, not because of what it said, because of how it was written. There was no punctuation except the period. No formatting. Just that statement sitting in the system like it had always been there. Like someone casually leaving a note on a fridge. I told Melissa again that I hadn't logged in overnight. She believed me. I could tell. But that didn't solve anything. So we did what museums always do when something weird happens. We checked storage, specifically Section C. The elevator ride down to the storage level felt different that day. The building above us was already quiet because they'd started escorting visitors out. When the doors opened onto the basement corridor, the silence felt heavier than usual. You know that feeling when a building is technically functioning, but something about it feels paused, like a school hallway after everyone's gone home. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Melissa walked ahead of me with her tablet open. We reached the spiritualism crate in maybe 30 seconds. Same place, same shelving unit. Nothing looked disturbed. She lifted the lid first. The photographs were still inside. The pendulum too. But the space where the Ouija board had been was empty. And here's the part that bothered me more than the missing board. There was an outline left in the dust. Not like the clean rectangle you'd expect if something had been lifted out. The outline looked smudged, like the board had been dragged sideways before being removed. Melissa whispered, almost to herself, "Who took it?" The camera for Section C was mounted above the hallway entrance. We checked the feed immediately. Nobody had entered the area since Wednesday afternoon. No staff, no security, no maintenance. Just empty corridor footage, looping through hours of nothing. But the board was gone. And my login credentials had somehow been used in the database at 3:12 a.m. That's when the director decided to shut the museum down for the weekend. Staff only. Full inventory check. At the time, that felt like an overreaction. Now I think it might have been the only moment we could have stopped everything. Friday night, we stayed late cataloguing exhibits. The museum after dark is a strange place, even when nothing bad is happening. The gift shop lights were off. The cafe smelled faintly like burnt coffee from earlier in the day. Outside, rain had started hitting the big glass entrance doors. Security walked the halls every 30 minutes. I spent most of that night in the collections office updating records. Around 9:40 p.m. I checked the Ouija board entry again. The note was still there. One taken. More requested. No new edits. I remember joking weakly to Melissa that it sounded like some weird RPG quest log. She didn't laugh. "Delete it," she said. I tried. The system wouldn't let me. The edit field was locked. The weird thing was the entry didn't show an author anymore. The log that had displayed my username earlier now just said, "User unknown." At around 10:30, we finally decided to call it a night. Security locked the front doors. Most staff left. Only a few of us stayed behind finishing paperwork. I grabbed my jacket and headed toward the elevator to the storage floor. I had left my backpack down there earlier. The building felt different by then, quieter than I'd ever heard it. Even the HVAC system sounded muffled. When the elevator doors opened onto the basement corridor, the air felt colder than usual. I walked towards Section B first, where my locker was. The hallway lights flickered once, then steadied. Nothing unusual. I grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and started walking back toward the elevator. That's when I noticed something down the corridor. At the far end of the storage level, there's a heavy door that leads to a small archive room. It's usually locked. But that night, it was open. Just slightly. The overhead light inside the room was on. I remember thinking someone from conservation must still be working. So I walked over. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside the room were shelves of boxed artifacts, old documents, storage trays. Everything looked normal at first, except for one thing. In the center of the room, on top of a flat archival table, was the Ouija board. The exact same one from the crate. Dark wood. Carved letters. Planchette resting on top. But it wasn't sitting the way I remembered. The planchette wasn't in the center anymore. It was resting on a letter. The letter M. And slowly, I realized something else. The board wasn't dusty anymore. The table around it had a faint ring of disturbed dust, like something had been moving there repeatedly. Back and forth. Back and forth. I stepped closer. I don't even know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or that weird museum instinct where you feel responsible for every object in the building. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A Slack notification. From Melissa. I glanced down to read it. Did you move the board? My stomach dropped. I typed back immediately. No. I'm literally looking at it right now. The typing indicator appeared on her side, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, another message came through. That's not possible. Right after that, something moved. Not fast, not dramatic, just a small sound. Wood sliding across wood. I looked up. The planchette had shifted, just a fraction of an inch. But I hadn't touched the table. I hadn't even been breathing near it. My skin prickled. I stared at the board. The room was completely silent except for the buzzing fluorescent light overhead. Then the planchette moved again. Slow. Scraping. Dragging itself across the surface of the board. One letter at a time. I swear to you, I didn't touch it. My hands were at my sides. But the thing kept moving. M, then O, then R, then E. The planchette stopped. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Melissa. Check the database. My hands were shaking when I opened the catalog app. The Ouija board entry refreshed automatically. The old message was gone. In its place was a new one. 2 taken. More requested. And in that moment I realized something that made my chest feel tight. 2 artifacts had disappeared already. The compass. The amulet. 2 taken. More requested. While I was standing there trying to process that, the planchette on the board started moving again. This time faster. Dragging across letters. Scraping sounds filling the room. And I couldn't stop watching. Because the board wasn't spelling random words. It was listing things. Specific things. Exhibit numbers. Catalogue IDs. Objects in the museum. One after another. Like a shopping list. And every single one of them was still sitting in a display case upstairs. The sound that thing made when it moved is still burned into my head. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a slow wooden scrape, like someone dragging a dull knife across a cutting board in the next room. The kind of sound your brain immediately wants to ignore. Except I was standing 2 feet away from it, watching. The planchette slid across the board again, stopping on another letter. My phone screen was still glowing in my hand with the catalogue system open. The new message stared back at me like it had always been there. Two taken. More requested. The scraping continued. Letter. Pause. Letter. Pause. The movement wasn't random. I could see it clearly now. The board wasn't trying to form words like hello or goodbye, like you see in those cheesy ghost videos online. It was spelling catalogue numbers, real ones. Every artifact in the museum had one, a combination of letters and numbers that matched the database. It's how museums track everything from massive sculptures to tiny coins. The planchette slid again. C. Pause. Pause. My brain did the matching automatically. C-71. A Civil War cavalry saber. Second floor military exhibit. Locked glass case. The planchette moved again. Another number. Another code. Every time it finished one, my phone buzzed. Slack notifications from Melissa. The first message. Are you typing those IDs into the database? Then another. They're appearing in the request log. I typed back quickly. I'm not touching anything. The scraping stopped for a moment. I thought maybe it was over. Then the planchette snapped sideways like someone flicked it. Hard. The wood cracked against the edge of the board with a sharp clack. My chest tightened. Something about that movement felt different. More aggressive. The fluorescent light above me flickered once. Then again. Then steadied. I should have walked out right then. Closed the door. Pretended none of it happened. But there's this weird instinct when you work in museums. You're trained to document everything. Even the strange stuff. Especially the strange stuff. So instead of leaving, I opened the camera app on my phone and started recording. The video begins with the board sitting on the table. You can hear the buzzing light overhead. My breathing. Then the planchette starts moving again. Slower this time. Almost deliberate. It spelled another code. E14. I didn't recognize that one immediately. My phone buzzed. Melissa again. Stop whatever you're doing. Then another message immediately after. The Edison phonograph just disappeared. My stomach dropped. That artifact had been on display for years. Heavy, mounted, inside a locked case. And now it was gone. The planchette kept moving. Another code. A 3. Buzz. Melissa. Native American ceremonial mask. Gone. The scraping sped up. Letter after letter. Number after number. The table vibrated slightly each time the wood dragged across the board. My hands were shaking so bad the video kept blurring. That's when I noticed something else. The temperature in the room had dropped. Not a little, a lot. The kind of cold that creeps under your clothes and makes your arms tighten. My breath started fogging faintly in front of me. The fluorescent light flickered again. Longer this time. And for a split second, the room went dark. Just long enough that the only thing I could see was the glowing screen of my phone. When the light snapped back on, the planchette had moved again. But this time, it wasn't on a letter. It was sitting on the word yes. I hadn't seen it move there. It was just suddenly there. My phone buzzed again. But it wasn't Slack. It was a database alert. Collection system notification. Inventory discrepancy detected. Then another. And another. My screen filled with alerts like a slot machine going crazy. Artifacts disappearing across the museum. Paintings, coins, tools. Entire display objects. Every one of them matching the codes the board had just spelled. It wasn't stealing them randomly. It was selecting them, requesting them, taking them. I backed away from the table slowly. The planchette stayed still for a moment. Then it slid again. But this time, it didn't go to letters. It went straight to goodbye. The movement stopped. Silence filled the room again. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds before I realized something else. The door behind me had closed. I didn't hear it move. But when I turned around, it was shut. The handle didn't budge when I grabbed it. Locked. My heart started pounding hard enough that I could hear it. I turned back toward the table. The board hadn't moved, but something else had changed. The shelves around the room, boxes, crates, artifacts in protective trays. A lot of them were open now, and I knew for a fact they hadn't been earlier. I stepped closer to one shelf, an archival tray that used to hold 3 small bronze coins. Empty. Another shelf. A carved wooden idol that had been catalogued earlier that week. Gone. It looked like the room had been picked clean. Not broken into. Not damaged. Just emptied. The artifacts weren't on the floor. They weren't scattered. They were simply not there anymore. The planchette scraped again behind me. I spun around. It had moved back to the center of the board. Then it started sliding in slow circles, round and round. Faster. Faster. The wood began rattling against the board. The table vibrated. I grabbed my phone tighter. The camera was still recording. And through the phone screen, I noticed something I hadn't seen with my own eyes. Behind the board, near the back wall of the room, there was something wrong with the shadows. The shelves cast long lines across the floor under the fluorescent light. Normal shadows. Except one of them was moving. Slowly. Like something inside it was shifting. Stretching. The longer I stared at the screen, the clearer it became. The shadow didn't belong to any shelf, or box, or object. It looked like a shape. A tall one. Too tall for the room. And it wasn't standing still. It was leaning closer. Toward the table. Toward the board. Toward me. The planchette slammed into the edge of the board so hard it flipped over. The light above us burst with a loud pop. The room went completely black. My phone camera was the only light left, and in that faint screen glow, I saw the board move. Not the planchette. The entire board. It slid across the table by itself, stopping right at the edge closest to me. Then the planchette slowly turned over again, like invisible fingers had flipped it upright. It dragged across the board one last time, spelling a word, not a catalog number, not a code, just one word. My phone buzzed again. One new entry in the database. The catalog page had updated. The message now read, 37 taken. Underneath it, a second line appeared. I felt the blood drain from my face when I read it, because the new line didn't list an artifact. It listed something else, a completely different type of entry, one that doesn't normally exist in museum inventory systems. A personnel record, my name, and next to it, the word requested. The first thing I felt when I saw my name in the database wasn't fear. It was confusion. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, just that dull, heavy moment where your brain refuses to process what your eyes are clearly reading. My phone screen was still glowing in my hand. The collection's database page had refreshed itself automatically. At the top of the entry was the artifact record for the Ouija board. Below that, 37 taken. And then the new line. Personnel, my full name. Status, requested. I remember blinking a few times like the text might disappear. It didn't. Behind me, the planchette slid again. Not fast, not violent, just a quiet, slow movement across the board. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound made something inside my chest tighten. I turned slowly toward the table. The phone camera was still recording. I could see the red dot blinking on the screen. The planchette stopped on the letter H. Then it moved again. E. Then another scrape. R. Then the last letter. E. It paused. Here. I swallowed. My mouth had gone dry in that weird way where it feels like you've been breathing desert air for hours. The room was still completely dark except for my phone. The fluorescent light that had popped earlier hadn't come back on. Every shelf in the archive room was now just a tall shadow shape, except for the table and the board. The planchette started circling again, faster than before. The wooden piece rattled against the carved letters. My phone buzzed again. Another database update. The message had changed. Not the artifact count, the line underneath it. My personnel entry had been expanded. It now showed more information. My employee ID, my department, my badge access level, and one new field. Location confirmed. My stomach twisted. I didn't type anything. I didn't log anything. But the system somehow knew exactly where I was. The planchette slammed against the edge of the board again, hard enough to make the table shudder. Then it dragged itself across the letters again, one by one. S-T-A-Y, I didn't stay. The moment the word finished, I grabbed the door handle again and pulled as hard as I could. This time, it opened. I didn't question it. I stepped into the hallway immediately. The storage corridor lights were still on, but they looked dimmer than usual, like the electricity in the building had dropped. The air felt wrong. Thick. Cold. My phone buzzed again. Melissa. I answered immediately. Melissa, I said. My voice sounded shaky, even to me. You need to check the system again. There was silence on the other end for a second. Then she said something that made the back of my neck tighten. I am. Her voice sounded different. Not panicked. Not calm. Just hollow. Artifacts are still disappearing, she said. How many now? I asked. Another pause. Then she said, 62. The number made my stomach drop. That many objects couldn't just vanish without anyone noticing. Security? I asked. Watching footage, she said. Anything? No one touching the cases. I started walking toward the elevator while she spoke. The corridor felt longer than usual. Every footstep echoed too loudly. Then she said something else. They're not just disappearing from displays anymore. I stopped walking. What do you mean? Her voice dropped slightly. Storage, too. My grip tightened around the phone. What? We're watching it happen on camera, she said. Boxes opening, shelves emptying. I turned slowly and looked back down the hallway behind me. The storage aisles stretched into darkness. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then something shifted. One of the metal storage racks in Section B. A crate slid off the shelf. Not falling. Sliding. Like someone invisible had pushed it. It stopped at the edge. Then tipped. The lid cracked open when it hit the floor. I heard Melissa speaking again on the phone, but my brain barely registered the words. Because something inside that crate was moving. Not an animal. Not something alive. Just objects shifting. Tools. Artifacts. Sliding toward the edge of the broken lid. Then lifting. I know how insane that sounds. But they didn't fall. They lifted. One by one. Like something in the air was taking them. The objects vanished mid-air. No drop. No sound. Just gone. The crate emptied itself completely. I backed away slowly. Melissa, I whispered. What? They're taking them. I know. Her voice sounded even quieter now. They're taking them upstairs too. That sentence didn't make sense at first. Upstairs, I said. The galleries. Then she added something that made my chest tighten. Come up here. I didn't ask questions. I ran to the elevator and slammed the button. The doors opened almost immediately. The ride to the main floor felt longer than usual, even though it was only a few seconds. When the doors slid open, the museum didn't look like the same place anymore. Display cases were open everywhere. Not broken, just open. Pedestals empty, wall mounts bare. Even large objects had vanished. A massive bronze statue that had stood in the central hall for years was gone. Just an empty platform where it used to stand. Security guards were moving quickly between rooms. Melissa was standing near the front desk, staring at a laptop. Her face looked pale under the lobby light. I walked over. How many now? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She just turned the screen toward me. The database page had updated again. 112 taken. My name was still listed underneath. But now the status had changed. The word requested had been replaced. Now it said, preparing. I felt a cold pressure settle in my chest. What does that mean? I asked. Melissa didn't answer, because something in the room moved. Not on a shelf, not inside a case. The air itself shifted, like heat distortion above asphalt, except cold. Every loose object in the lobby began to vibrate slightly. Pens, brochures, coins in the donation box. The security guards noticed it too. One of them said something under his breath. Then the glass donation box cracked. Not shattered. Cracked. Thin fractures spreading across the surface. The coins inside began lifting into the air slowly. Hundreds of them, floating, rotating, then disappearing one by one. A security guard ran toward the door. It slammed shut before he reached it. Every display case in the lobby popped open at the same time with sharp metallic clicks. Melissa whispered something next to me. What did we wake up? I didn't answer, because my phone buzzed again. Another database update. The artifact count jumped. 150 taken. Below it, my personnel entry refreshed again. The status had changed a second time. This time the word on the screen made my throat tighten so hard I could barely breathe. Collection in progress. And right as those words appeared, every light in the museum went out at once. Complete darkness. Except for one thing. In the center of the lobby floor, the Ouija board was sitting there, and the planchette was already moving. The darkness inside a museum is different from normal darkness. Most buildings still have some kind of light, street glow through windows, exit signs reflecting off walls, something to soften it. Museums at night don't. Once the lights shut off, the place becomes a hollow shell full of shapes your brain can't immediately understand. Statues look like people standing too still. Glass cases turn into black mirrors. Long hallways stretch out like tunnels. And that night, when the entire building lost power, the silence that followed was so thick it felt like it was pressing on my ears. No HVAC hum, no fluorescent buzz. Just the sound of several people breathing in the dark. And something else. A slow scraping sound. Wood against polished floor. I knew what it was before my eyes even adjusted. The Ouija board. It was sitting in the middle of the lobby, and the planchette was moving. The only light in the room came from scattered phone screens. Security guards had theirs out. Melissa lifted hers too. When the glow from those screens hit the floor, we could finally see the board clearly. It hadn't just appeared there. It had moved there. There was a long trail across the marble floor where it had slid from the hallway. The wood had scratched a faint line into the surface like something had dragged it slowly through the museum. And now it had stopped directly in the center of the room. The planchette kept moving, scraping, turning, stopping, then moving again. None of us stepped closer. We just watched. Because the movement had changed again. Earlier it had spelled words, codes, requests. Now it was moving in long, sweeping lines. Melissa whispered next to me, It's drawing something. She was right. The planchette wasn't pointing at letters. It was tracing shapes across the board. Slow loops, crossing lines, circles that overlapped again and again. It took me a few seconds to understand what I was looking at. Those weren't random shapes. They were floor plans. The board was tracing the layout of the museum. Hallways, rooms, exhibit spaces, storage wings. Every part of the building mapped across those carved letters. The planchette paused, then dragged itself to the center of the board again, and stopped on yes. My phone buzzed. Even without internet, the internal museum database was still running on its local server. The screen refreshed again. 203 taken. The artifact count was climbing faster now. Objects were disappearing across the entire building. Then the entry below it changed again. My name was still there, still listed under personnel, but the status had updated. Collection in progress. And underneath it, a new field appeared. Transfer point. Active. The moment those words appeared, something inside the museum shifted. It wasn't loud, just a low vibration through the floor. The kind you feel before a train passes nearby. The marble under my shoes trembled slightly. Around the lobby, every empty display pedestal began to hum. Glass cases rattled softly. Metal mounts vibrated. And then, things started appearing. Not falling. Not materializing in some bright flash. They were just suddenly there. The missing artifacts. One by one. The Civil War saber clattered onto the floor near the staircase. The Edison phonograph dropped onto a pedestal that had been empty minutes earlier. Coins spilled across the marble like someone had dumped a jar of them. A bronze idol appeared on the front desk with a dull metallic thud. Objects that had vanished were now returning. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Dropping from empty air like invisible hands were unloading them. But something about it felt wrong immediately. Because the artifacts weren't being placed carefully. They were being discarded. Thrown down. Piled. The museum floor quickly filled with objects. Ancient tools. Ceramics. Fragments of sculptures. Documents. Masks. Weapons. Everything that had been taken. Melissa stared at the chaos around us. "They're giving them back," she said quietly. But I knew that wasn't true. Because my phone buzzed again. Another database update. The artifact counter reset to 0. Every object in the system had just been marked returned. Every object, except one entry. The only thing still listed in the collection log was the personnel record. Mine. The status had changed again. Now it said, Primary Acquisition. The moment I read that, the Ouija board on the floor jerked violently. The planchette shot across the surface like something had shoved it hard. It slammed onto yes again. The vibration in the floor grew stronger, and then the air in the center of the lobby began to warp. It's hard to explain what that looked like. Imagine heat rising off pavement in summer. That shimmering distortion. Now imagine that distortion folding inward. The space above the Ouija board twisted slightly, like the air was being pulled through a funnel. The objects around it started sliding across the marble. Coins first, then papers, then heavier things. Everything was moving toward that distortion, not falling into it, just disappearing when they reached it. Melissa grabbed my arm. "Do you see that?" I nodded, because at that point there was no denying what was happening. The museum wasn't being robbed. It was being catalogued. Everything inside it had been examined, taken, then rejected. Except for one thing: me. The database entry on my phone refreshed again. Transfer ready. The distortion in the air grew wider. The Ouija board cracked down the middle with a loud snap. The planchette slid across the broken wood one last time, spelling something slowly. C-O-M-E. My legs wouldn't move. Not frozen, just heavy, like gravity had doubled around me. Melissa was shouting something, but her voice sounded far away. The security guards were trying to drag objects away from the center of the lobby, but anything they touched slid right out of their hands toward the distortion. My phone buzzed again. Another system update. This time, the message wasn't in the artifact log. It appeared in a completely different part of the database. The collection's description field. The place where curators write explanations for exhibits. The text filled the screen slowly, like someone typing it letter by letter. Specimen located. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it. The distortion widened. The floor beneath the Ouija board cracked. And something inside that warped space shifted. Not a shape. Not a body. Just a suggestion of movement. Like something enormous had leaned closer to examine the room. The database text continued. Consciousness stable. The pull in the air grew stronger. Loose artifacts slid across the floor toward the center. My shoes scraped against the marble. Melissa was pulling my arm now. Hard. "Move!" she yelled. But the pressure around me kept increasing. The screen refreshed again. Transfer initiated. And that's the last clear thing I remember from that night, because right when the distortion reached its widest point, the fire suppression system activated. Every sprinkler in the museum exploded with water. Cold, heavy streams pouring down from the ceiling. The sudden impact knocked the Ouija board pieces apart. Water flooded the marble floor. And whatever that distortion was, collapsed. The pressure vanished instantly. Artifacts stopped sliding. The lobby lights flickered back on seconds later as the backup generator kicked in. The museum looked like a disaster zone. Hundreds of objects scattered across the floor. Water pouring everywhere. Broken glass. Security alarms screaming. But the center of the lobby was empty again. No distortion. No board. Just cracked marble. And me standing there soaked, staring at my phone. The database page had updated one last time. The personnel record was gone. The artifact log was empty. And in the exhibit description field, there was only a single line left. Acquisition failed. The museum closed permanently 3 months later. Official explanation was structural damage and inventory complications. Most of the staff left. Melissa transferred to another institution. The artifacts were redistributed to other collections across the country. The Ouija board was never found. The database server was wiped during the shutdown. But here's the part I still can't explain. About 2 weeks after the museum closed, I got an automated email from the old collection system. I shouldn't have. The servers were supposed to be offline. The message had no subject line, no sender, just a single attachment, a screenshot from the database. The artifact log was visible. One entry. Just one. No artifact number. No description. Just a catalog name. And I swear I didn't sleep the entire night after reading it, because the catalog entry didn't list an object. It listed a location. A place I had never heard of before. Coordinates. Latitude and longitude. And underneath it, the system status. Searching for additional specimens. A bus driver told us a story about an Ouija board. One kid collapsed before he finished. I almost didn't post this. Not because it's fake or anything like that. Honestly, I wish it was. The problem is, every time I try to explain it, people either laugh or say I'm exaggerating because it sounds like the setup to some cheesy horror movie. But it actually happened. And I know it happened because there were like 30 of us on that bus. And every single one of us remembers the exact moment everything went wrong. This was back when I was 16, during our school trip to Washington, D.C. Our school did this thing every year where all the juniors would pile onto a charter bus and spend a few days visiting museums, monuments, all the typical history trip stuff teachers love. The drive was long, about 9 hours. So naturally, everyone was already half delirious before we even left the parking lot. It was still dark outside when we got there. Like that weird blue-grey early morning where the sun isn't up yet, but birds are already making noise. Parents were standing around with coffee cups, hugging their kids, reminding everyone to text when we got there. Meanwhile, we were just messing around in the parking lot waiting to board the bus. And most of the jokes were about the new bus driver. Apparently, the company that usually handled our school trips had switched drivers last minute, so nobody recognized the guy. One of my friends, Tyler, was the first one to point him out. He nudged me and whispered, "Dude, tell me that guy doesn't look like an evil witch." I looked over toward the bus. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, the comparison wasn't great, but it also wasn't completely wrong. The guy was tall, but really thin, with this long grey beard and a crooked nose. He wore a dark cap pulled low over his eyes and had these long fingers wrapped around a thermos of coffee. The way he stood there in the dim light kinda made him look like he'd stepped out of some old black and white movie. Tyler leaned closer and said, "If he starts stirring a cauldron instead of driving the bus, I'm getting my mum to pick me up." A few of us started laughing. Then one of the girls nearby said something that made it even weirder. My mum actually warned me about him. We turned toward her. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. She said that guy used to drive for another school, and that when he was younger he had, problems. "What kind of problems?" Tyler asked. She lowered her voice a little. "My mum said people in town used to say he wasn't right in the head when he was a kid." That immediately made the conversation 10 times more interesting. "What? Like crazy?" "I don't know," she said. "Something about him getting obsessed with weird stuff when he was younger. Someone else chimed in. My dad said he used to mess with Ouija boards and ghost stuff all the time. Tyler grinned. Okay, that actually makes the evil witch thing way funnier. Now a few more people were listening. The rumors started stacking up the way they always do when teenagers get bored. Someone said the driver had once gotten fired from another job for telling creepy stories to students. Another person claimed their older cousin had ridden his bus years ago and said he talked to himself while driving. Most of it was probably exaggerated. But at the time, standing there in that cold morning air with the bus headlights glowing through the fog, it definitely added a weird vibe. Then the teachers started calling everyone to board. We grabbed our bags and climbed onto the bus. Inside, it smelled exactly like every charter bus ever. That mix of fabric cleaner, old carpet, and faint coffee. People started claiming seats immediately. My friends and I took spots around the middle. Phones came out. AirPods went in. Someone already had a bag of McDonald's breakfast sandwiches that made the whole aisle smell like hash browns. Pretty normal start to a long trip. The driver climbed into his seat a minute later. Up close, he looked older than I thought. Deep lines in his face, tired eyes. His name tag said Carl. He didn't look at anyone for a moment, just adjusted the mirrors and took a slow sip from his thermos. Then he spoke over his shoulder. Everybody buckled? A few people mumbled yes. The engine started with that heavy diesel rumble. Outside the windows, parents waved goodbye as we pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road. And honestly, for the first few hours, nothing strange happened. People slept. Others watched TikTok or YouTube. Someone in the back was playing music quietly through a Bluetooth speaker until a teacher told them to turn it off. Around 8:30, we stopped at a gas station somewhere in Pennsylvania, the kind with bright fluorescent lights and a Dunkin' attached to the side. Everyone piled out. Bathroom lines, energy drinks, bags of chips. I remember standing near the vending machines scrolling Instagram while the sky was this dull, cloudy grey. Completely normal road trip stuff. If someone had told me then that one of the kids on that bus was going to collapse later that morning, and that it would happen right when the driver started telling us about a Ouija board, I probably would have laughed. But when we got back on the bus and started driving again, Carl suddenly broke the silence. Not through the bus speaker, just casually, like someone remembering something. You kids ever mess around with a Ouija board before? At first, nobody really reacted. But then Tyler leaned forward in his seat and whispered, "Oh, great. The witch is about to tell a ghost story." A few of us laughed quietly. Carl kept his eyes on the road. "I drove a bus full of college kids once," he said. "Late night trip. They brought one of those boards with them." Now more people were listening. They thought it'd be funny to use it while the bus was moving. He tapped the steering wheel lightly. They asked it normal questions first. You know, names, spirits, dumb stuff like that. Someone behind me said, "Did anything actually happen?" Carl paused. Then he said something that made the entire bus slowly quiet down. One of them asked a different question. Tyler raised an eyebrow. "What question?" Carl looked into the rearview mirror and said quietly, "They asked the board who was already on the bus with them." For a second, nobody said anything. Then someone nervously laughed. Carl didn't. They thought one of their friends was moving the piece, he said. But the board spelled something. He took a slow breath. And right when he was about to tell us what it spelled, every phone on the bus vibrated at the same time. Not one or two, all of them. 30 phones buzzing at once. And when we looked down at our screens, we realized every single one of us had received the exact same message. The buzzing didn't stop right away. That's one detail people always leave out when they retell this. It wasn't just a quick notification sound, it kept going. Phones vibrating against plastic seats, against the metal rails, against the floor. That low, angry bzz, 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 filling the bus like a swarm of trapped insects. Everyone was looking around, confused. "Did you guys get something?" Someone said from the back. Yeah, me too." I remember pulling my phone out of my hoodie pocket and feeling it vibrating so hard it almost slipped out of my hand. At first, I thought it was our class group chat blowing up, but when I unlocked the screen, it wasn't a message from anyone I knew. No contact name, no number, just a blank sender. And the message was only 4 words. "I'm already here." For a second, my brain did that thing where it tries to rationalize something stupid. Spam message. Glitch. Someone hacking the bus Wi-Fi. But then Tyler leaned across the aisle toward me slowly. He didn't say anything at first. He just turned his phone so I could see the screen. Same message, same blank sender. "I'm already here." Behind us, someone said, "What the hell?" Another voice further back said, "Did everyone get this?" Hands started raising all over the bus. 30 teenagers holding up glowing phone screens, every single one with the same message. Carl didn't react at first. He just kept driving. But in the rearview mirror, I saw his eyes flick down toward the students, then toward the phones, then back to the road. His expression changed in a way I still can't explain. Not surprised, not confused. Something closer to recognition, like someone hearing a song they haven't heard in years. Tyler laughed nervously. "Okay, which one of you idiots set this up?" Nobody answered. People started checking their signal bars, refreshing apps, opening their messages. But the weirdest part, the message wasn't inside any normal app. Not iMessage, not Snapchat, not Instagram. It was just there, on the screen, like a notification that existed outside everything else. Then the bus hit a pothole. The whole vehicle jolted. And that's when the kid across the aisle from me made the sound. It was quiet at first. Just this wet little choking noise. Like someone trying to cough while swallowing water. I turned. His name was Brandon. Quiet kid. Always wore oversized hoodies and kept to himself. He was sitting 2 seats ahead of me by the window. At first, I thought he was just laughing. But then I saw his face. His eyes were wide. Not normal wide. The kind where the whites show all the way around the iris. His mouth opened slowly, like he was trying to say something. But nothing came out. His phone slid out of his hand and landed in the aisle. Then his whole body folded forward. Not dramatically, Not like in movies. It was worse than that. His muscles just stopped. Like someone had unplugged him. He dropped straight out of the seat and slammed into the aisle floor with a heavy thud. For about 3 seconds, nobody moved. It felt like the entire bus forgot how to react. Then someone screamed. The teachers rushed down the aisle. "Move! Move! Give him space!" One of them knelt beside him. "Brandon, can you hear me?" He wasn't responding. His body was twitching slightly. Small jerky movements in his arms and legs. His phone was still lying face up on the floor. And for some reason, my eyes locked onto the screen. The same message. But it had changed. Before it said, "I'm already here." Now there was another line underneath. "One of you asked." My stomach dropped. Because nobody had typed anything. Nobody had responded. Yet the message had updated. Tyler leaned into the aisle to look. "Dude, what the..." The bus driver slammed the brakes. The entire bus lurched forward violently. Backpacks slid down the aisle. Someone hit their head on a seat. Carl stood up halfway from his seat and shouted toward the back. "Everybody stay where you are." His voice sounded different now. Tight. Almost panicked. The bus rolled to a stop on the shoulder of the highway. Outside the windows there was nothing but trees and grey sky. No buildings. No other cars nearby. Just empty road stretching in both directions. Inside the bus, things were chaotic. One teacher was calling 911. Another was trying to keep Brandon from rolling onto his side. His body kept twitching, but his eyes were open now. And that's when something happened that I've never been able to explain. He started whispering. Not talking. Whispering. At first, it sounded like random sounds. Broken syllables. But the teacher leaned closer. "What are you saying?" "Brandon, slow down." His lips kept moving. Over and over. The same phrase. The teacher froze. Then she slowly looked up toward the front of the bus. Toward Carl. Her face had completely drained of color. "What is he saying?" someone asked. She didn't answer. Brandon's whisper got louder. Not loud, but clearer. And that's when the rest of us started hearing it too. He wasn't saying random words. He was repeating something again, and again, and again. The driver didn't finish. The driver didn't finish. The driver didn't finish. Every repetition sounded more strained, like his throat was tightening around the words. Carl stood up fully now. He looked back at the aisle, at Brandon. Then his eyes moved slowly across the bus, across all of us. 30 students sitting there with phones in their hands. 30 glowing screens. 30 identical messages. He rubbed his face with both hands, like someone trying to wake up from a nightmare. Then he said something that made the entire bus feel colder. "You shouldn't have listened." Nobody understood what he meant. Tyler said, "What?" Carl ignored him. He walked down the aisle slowly, each step heavy against the floor. When he reached Brandon, he crouched beside him, and for a few seconds he just stared at the kid. Not with concern, not with panic, with recognition. The same expression he had earlier, like someone seeing an old photograph come to life. Then he looked at Brandon's phone on the floor. He picked it up. His hand trembled slightly. Everyone watched in silence. Carl turned the screen toward himself, and the moment he saw it, his entire face changed. Not fear, something worse. Resignation, like a man realizing a door had just closed behind him forever. Tyler whispered beside me, "What does it say now?" Carl didn't answer. He just lowered the phone slowly. But I leaned far enough into the aisle to see the screen. The message had changed again. Now there were 3 lines. "I'm already here. One of you asked." And the newest line blinking underneath, "Now I'm listening." Carl didn't answer when Tyler asked what the message said. He just stood there in the aisle, holding Brandon's phone like it was something fragile or dangerous, like the screen might burn him if he held it too long. Nobody moved. Not the teachers, not the kids. Even Brandon had stopped twitching. He was lying on the floor, breathing in these shallow, dry breaths that sounded wrong somehow, like each inhale had to fight its way into his lungs. The bus engine was still running, that low diesel rumble vibrating through the floor. Outside the windows, the trees barely moved in the wind. It felt like the world had paused. Carl finally looked up. His eyes slowly scanned the bus again. I swear it felt like he was counting us, one by one, seat by seat. Then he spoke quietly. "You shouldn't answer it." The teacher near Brandon frowned. "Answer what?" Carl lifted the phone slightly. "That." Someone behind me said, "It's just a message." Carl's expression hardened. "No," he said. "That's not what it is." The way he said it made the entire bus feel smaller somehow, like the air pressure had dropped. The teacher grabbed her phone and dialed again. "I already called an ambulance," she said. "We just need to—" Carl interrupted her. "They won't get here in time." Now people were getting irritated. One of the guys in the back laughed nervously. "Dude, what is this, a prank?" Carl didn't react. He just looked at Brandon again. The kid was still whispering, but the words had changed. Before he kept repeating, "The driver didn't finish." Now he was saying something else, over and over, his lips moving slowly, dry, cracked, like he had been talking for hours. "The seat is empty. The seat is empty. The seat is empty." At first, nobody understood what he meant. Then someone near the back turned around suddenly. "Wait." Everyone looked. There were 2 seats all the way at the back of the bus, the very last row. One of them had a backpack sitting on it, but the seat next to it was empty. That shouldn't have been strange. Except earlier that morning, every seat had been taken. 30 students, 2 teachers, every spot filled. Now there was an empty seat. Tyler frowned. Maybe someone moved. But nobody had. People started looking around, counting quietly, whispering. Where's Andrew? Didn't he sit back there? No, Andrew sat near the front. Wait, where's Melissa? The confusion spread through the bus like a slow ripple. Names being whispered, heads turning, but nobody could figure it out. It was like trying to remember a dream that fades the moment you focus on it. There was definitely an empty seat, but nobody could remember who was supposed to be sitting there. Carl noticed the confusion, and something about that seemed to make him more afraid. His hands tightened around the phone. You asked the board who was already on the bus, he said quietly. Tyler blinked. What board? Carl looked at him. The Ouija board. The entire bus went silent again. Someone near the window said, But we didn't use one. Carl shook his head slowly. You didn't have to. The words landed like something heavy. Nobody spoke. Carl rubbed his forehead. Then he sighed. The kind of tired sigh someone makes when they know something bad is coming, and there's no way to stop it. I've seen this before, he said. The teacher stood up. What are you talking about? Carl ignored her. He was staring toward the back of the bus, toward that empty seat. His voice dropped lower. Years ago, he said, those college kids asked the board the same question. He swallowed. And it answered. Someone whispered, What did it say? Carl closed his eyes briefly. Then he said the word. 1. Nobody reacted at first. Then Tyler said, 1 what? Carl opened his eyes. 1 passenger. The bus felt colder, even though the heater was still running. Carl continued. They thought it meant someone on the bus was possessed or something stupid like that. His voice sounded distant, like he was remembering something he didn't want to. But the board kept moving. He made a slow, sliding motion with his finger across Brandon's phone screen. Letter by letter. Everyone leaned forward slightly. What did it spell? Someone asked. Carl looked toward the back of the bus again. At the time, he said quietly, there were 41 people on that bus. Nobody spoke. Carl continued. The board spelled a number. My chest tightened. What number? Tyler asked. Carl didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned Brandon's phone toward us. The screen had updated again. The message thread now had another line underneath the others. 4 lines total. I'm already here. One of you asked. Now I'm listening. And the newest one. How many of you are there? My stomach dropped. Because right as I finished reading it, Brandon stopped whispering. Completely. The bus was dead quiet again. Then his head turned slowly. Not toward the teachers. Not toward Carl. Toward the back of the bus. Toward the empty seat. His eyes widened, and he screamed. Not a normal scream. This was the kind of scream that comes from somewhere deep inside the body. Pure panic. pure terror. He started clawing at the floor, trying to drag himself away from the back of the bus, his nails scraping against the aisle. The teachers tried to hold him down. "Brandon! Brandon, calm down!" But he kept screaming, over and over. It sat down. It sat down. It sat down. People twisted around in their seats, looking, trying to see what he meant. But the seat still looked empty. Just an empty blue cushion. Nothing there. Then Tyler grabbed my arm. Hard. "Dude." His voice was shaking. "Look." He pointed toward the back window. At first, I didn't see anything. Just the reflection of the bus interior. Then I noticed something wrong. The reflection showed every seat, every student, every teacher, even Carl standing in the aisle. But the reflection of the last row was different. The empty seat wasn't empty. In the window's reflection, someone was sitting there. A tall shape, too thin, head tilted slightly forward, watching the bus, watching us, and slowly, very slowly, its reflection turned its head and looked directly at me. Nobody spoke. Not after that. Because once you see something like that, your brain doesn't react right away. It kind of stalls out, like a computer freezing. You're looking straight at the evidence that something impossible is happening. But the part of your mind that handles fear hasn't caught up yet. Tyler was still gripping my arm, hard enough that it hurt. "Do you see it?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because if I spoke, it meant I had to admit it was real. The back window reflected the entire bus interior like a dark mirror. Every seat, every head, every movement, except the last row. In the reflection, the empty seat wasn't empty anymore. Something was sitting there. Its shape looked wrong. Too long. Too thin. Like someone had stretched a human body slightly past the point where it should still make sense. The shoulders were narrow and sharp. Its arms rested along the sides of the seat, but they looked too long for the space. The head was tilted slightly forward, and even though the reflection was dim, I could see something where its face should have been. Not details, just darkness. Like the face absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Tyler whispered again. "Tell me that's not there." I slowly turned my head away from the window and looked directly at the back of the bus. The seat was empty. Nothing there. Just blue fabric and a wrinkled backpack sitting beside it. I felt my chest loosen slightly. "See?" Tyler said quietly. "Nothing's there." But when I glanced back toward the window, the reflection still showed it. Still sitting there. Still watching. My stomach twisted. Because reflections don't add things that aren't in the room. Carl saw it too. I know he did. His eyes were locked on the back window. His face had gone pale. The teachers were still trying to control Brandon. But the kid was completely hysterical now. He wasn't even trying to get up anymore. He was scrambling backward on the floor like a trapped animal, kicking, clawing, trying to get as far away from the back of the bus as possible. "It moved," he kept screaming. "It moved closer." One of the teachers grabbed his shoulders. "Brandon, nothing is there." He shook his head violently. "You can't see it." His voice cracked into something raw and desperate. "But it sees you." The bus felt smaller by the second, like the walls were closing in. Carl suddenly moved. Fast. He marched down the aisles toward the back. The teachers shouted after him, "What are you doing?" But he ignored them. Each step echoed heavily on the floor. Every student turned in their seat, watching him walk straight toward that last row, toward the empty seat. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Carl stopped one row before the back. He stared at the seat for several seconds. Then slowly, carefully, he leaned sideways and looked at the window, at the reflection. And the moment he did, he froze, completely still, like someone had pressed pause on his body. The entire bus waited. Nobody breathed. Carl whispered something, so quietly that only the students closest to him heard it. Tyler leaned forward slightly. "What did he say?" someone asked. Carl straightened slowly and turned back toward us. His face looked older somehow, like he had aged 10 years in those few seconds. "It followed," he said. Nobody understood. "What followed?" a girl near the front asked. Carl pointed toward the phones. "The question." A sick feeling crept into my stomach. Carl walked back down the aisle slowly. His eyes were darting between the seats, like he expected something to move. "Those college kids made the same mistake," he said. "They asked who was already on the bus." He looked toward the back again. And something answered. One of the teachers snapped, "This is not the time for ghost stories." Carl shook his head. "You don't understand." His voice was almost pleading now. "It doesn't need the board." He tapped Brandon's phone again. "It just needs the question." The air inside the bus suddenly filled with another vibration. Not loud, but noticeable. Every student instinctively looked down. Our phones had lit up again. Another line appeared on the message thread. "I'm already here. One of you asked. Now I'm listening. How many of you are there?" And beneath it, a new message. Typing. 3 grey dots blinking slowly. Someone near the front whispered, "No, no, no." The dots stopped. The new message appeared. 30. My chest tightened, because there weren't 30 of us anymore. Brandon was lying on the floor. Carl was standing in the aisle. The number was wrong. Tyler whispered beside me, "Wait." He started counting quietly under his breath, his finger pointing seat to seat. 26, 27. His voice got slower. 28. He stopped, looked at me, then slowly turned toward the back of the bus. Was she 29? Cold dread flooded through me, because that meant one thing. the message said 30, and there were only 29 people visible on the bus, then the thing sitting in the reflection had already been counted. Nobody spoke for a long time. Just the quiet sound of the engine idling. Then Brandon suddenly started laughing. Not screaming, not crying. Laughing. High-pitched. Broken. The teachers recoiled slightly. "Brandon," one of them said carefully. His laughter turned into words, soft, barely above a whisper. "It knows," he said. Everyone stared at him. He slowly lifted one shaking hand and pointed directly toward the back of the bus, toward the seat, toward the reflection. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "It wants the driver to finish the story." Carl didn't move when Brandon said that. The entire bus was staring at him. You could actually hear people breathing now. Short, tight breaths. Someone near the middle seats was quietly crying. The kind of quiet crying where you're trying not to make a sound because you don't want anyone to notice. But everyone noticed. Nobody said anything. Because Brandon wasn't just pointing randomly. His shaking finger was aimed directly toward the back row. Toward that seat. Toward the place where the reflection said someone was sitting. Carl slowly rubbed his face again. His hands looked older than I remembered. The skin thin. Veins visible under the surface. He looked exhausted. Not confused. Not scared in the way we were, just tired. Like someone who'd been carrying a secret too heavy for too long. "You shouldn't have listened to the beginning," he said quietly. One of the teachers snapped back. "Then maybe you shouldn't have started telling it." Carl didn't even look at her. He was staring down at Brandon. The kid's laughing had faded now. His eyes were glassy. But he was still whispering something under his breath. Carl leaned down slightly to hear it. Then he stood up again and shook his head. "He's right," Carl said. The words sounded hollow. "It wants the story finished." Tyler whispered beside me. Why? Carl answered him, without even looking. "Because that's how it knows where the end is." Nobody understood what that meant. Carl turned slowly toward the back of the bus again, toward the seat, and something changed in his posture. His shoulders lowered. Like a man giving up a fight he already knows he lost. "Those college kids," he said quietly. "Thought the board was talking to them." He took a slow breath. But the board wasn't the thing answering. Everyone was frozen now. Carl continued. They asked who was already on the bus. His voice sounded like gravel now. And it answered. Someone near the window whispered, 30. Carl shook his head. No. His eyes drifted to the floor. They were 41. Nobody spoke. Carl swallowed. The board spelled 42. The bus felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. I could actually see Tyler's breath fog slightly when he exhaled. Carl kept talking. They laughed at first. He looked toward the back window again. But then one of them noticed something. He slowly raised his hand. and pointed toward the rear of the bus. Someone was sitting in the back. A cold weight settled in my chest. Carl continued. They hadn't seen him get on. His voice cracked slightly. But there he was. Nobody interrupted him now. Even the teachers were silent. Tall, Carl said. Thin. His eyes flicked briefly toward the reflection in the window. Quiet. My hands were shaking now. Carl continued. They asked him who he was. Carl paused. The engine hummed under the floor. Nobody dared move. They thought he was another student. Carl's voice dropped lower. But when the bus finally stopped, and everyone got off, he slowly shook his head. There were still 42 footprints in the snow. The bus felt like it had completely lost oxygen. Carl looked back at Brandon. The kid had stopped laughing now. He was staring toward the back row again, completely silent. Carl sighed. The problem, he said quietly, is that when you ask who's already here, he looked at all of us. It answers honestly. My phone buzzed again. Not just mine. All of them. 30 screens lighting up again across the bus. The message thread had updated. Another line appeared. I'm already here. One of you asked. Now I'm listening. How many of you are there? 30. And beneath it, a new message. The driver finished. Carl saw it. His face slowly drained of color. Too late, he whispered. Tyler grabbed my arm again. What does that mean? Carl didn't answer, because something behind him moved. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet sound of fabric shifting. Every single head on that bus turned toward the back row. The seat, the reflection. The backpack slid off the seat, slowly, like someone had pushed it aside. The cushion sank slightly, like weight had settled into it. But there was still nothing there. Nothing we could see. The reflection in the window showed something else entirely. The figure had leaned forward now, its long arms resting on its knees, its head tilted curiously, watching us, studying. Carl turned slowly, and when he saw it, he whispered something. Not to us, to it. I drove you last time. The bus went silent again, and the reflection moved, just slightly, its head tilting the other direction, like it recognized him. Carl nodded slowly, like two people greeting each other. Then the bus doors opened. Nobody touched the controls, but the folding doors hissed open anyway. Outside, the road was empty. No cars, no ambulance, just the long grey highway disappearing into trees. Carl stepped aside from the aisle, like someone letting a passenger exit first. Nobody saw anything walk down the aisle, but we all heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. one step at a time, moving from the back toward the front. Every step made the floor creak, seat by seat, row by row, passing all of us. I felt the air change when it reached my row. Colder, sharper, like standing next to an open freezer. Tyler squeezed his eyes shut. The footsteps kept moving until they reached the front. Then they stopped, right next to Carl. Carl nodded once. The footsteps continued. Down the bus steps, out onto the road. The doors slammed shut. The bus was silent again. Nobody moved for almost a full minute. Then Brandon gasped, like someone surfacing from underwater. The teachers rushed to him again. "Brandon, can you hear us?" He blinked rapidly, confused. What happened? Carl slowly returned to the driver's seat. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the wheel. Then he looked back at us one last time and said something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. It only rides once. Then he started the bus and drove. The strangest part, when the ambulance finally met us at the next exit, they counted everyone, every student, every teacher, all present. No missing names, no extra passengers. 30 people exactly. But later that night, when I checked my phone again, the message thread was gone. Everything erased, except one screenshot someone had posted in our group chat. Just one message left on the screen. "Thank you for the ride." And underneath it, a final line none of us had seen before. "See you on the next bus."
So, this is for tonight's episode. I hope you have enjoyed, and if you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, comment down below. I really read your comments, I appreciate your comments. I know there was a discussion about the voice, but we'll test, we'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll bring the voice back, the old one. So yeah, see you in the next video.